Thank you so much. And hope you guys have been having a great conference. I know I took a look at the agenda and there were tons of speakers and tons of topics. And so I know this is the eighth session. But I think one that is really, really important that a lot of businesses are struggling with at this moment and period of time. So as mentioned, my name is Xiomara Pena. I am the Vice President of Engagement at Small Business Majority. We're going to be really covering a wide range of topics really related to the workforce gaps that we're seeing as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and in general. Why don't y'all, as you're joining us, it would be great to know who's in the room. So feel free to put your name, the name of your organization, and what city you're tuning in from into the chat. And that way it'd be nice to know where folks are joining us from today. So a little bit of background. I work with Small Business Majority. We are a national small business advocacy organization. We've been around for roughly 15 years. We're headquartered out of Washington, D.C. We have offices in about 8 different states. But of course, with everything going virtual, we have programming that's available in all 50 states, as well as some of the U.S. territories. Our organization really got a start because we recognize that oftentimes as policy is being crafted, developed, and then implemented, small business voices are not at the center or not at the table at all when some of those discussions are being had either at the state or federal level. And that's a big challenge. Think about who are our major job creators. It's small businesses. Here in California, small businesses create 2 out of every 3 new jobs. We know that small businesses account for the majority of businesses in the US, with 96% of all businesses having less than 50 employees, 92% of all businesses having less than 10 employees or considered micro businesses. And so at our organization's inception, we really found a need for 3 core areas. We focus on research, advocacy, and education. Our research work is a combination of our own internal surveys of business owners within our 85,000 small business network, gauging their perspectives on a variety of different topics. Workforce being one of them, access to capital being another, paid leave access, retirement security, general COVID-19 preparedness and gaps. We want to know how small business owners feel about around policy priorities and how their own businesses are being impacted at this present day and time. We also conduct third-party polling. Typically, this is done in collaboration with a polling organization to be able to really have a scientific data set on how small business owners perceive challenges or opportunities through policy recommendations. All of that research then drives our advocacy related work. This is our work that really looks to center small business owners' voices and own experiences by connecting them to media through writing letters to the editor or opinion editorial pieces. We frequently connect business owners to testimony opportunities, either on the Hill or in state offices around a variety of different topics. And we ourselves also work with our broad range of partner organizations to be able to mobilize around different efforts. And then the third component of our work is around education. We offer free education to small business owners. We do develop content on a variety of different topics. Workforce has been one of those themes that we've been working on for a number of years, especially as future of work issues have continued to grow. And never did we see that more heightened than over the last 18 months. And so as a national small business nonprofit, one of the things that has continued to rise over the last few months has been the challenges that we're seeing in the workforce space. Some folks are calling this the Great Resignation. We've seen droves of people, some at the beginning of the pandemic, forced to leave their work, because of closures, abrupt closures that their businesses or industries may have experienced. But in recent months, we've seen a large exodus of employees that are work eligible, that simply are not seeking to re-enter the work marketplace at this time. And we hosted a listening session for small business owners because we saw the news articles and we saw the trends that were impacting large businesses. And we wanted to know, is this also something that small business owners are being impacted with? And the short answer is yes. Many small business owners that attended the listening session that we held referenced a multitude of different challenges in bringing new staff into their businesses. One of the themes that was referenced was around the idea that workers have had some period to do some deep reflection around their priorities, and they're making lifestyle changes and choices. Some folks are not choosing to return to a two-income household, rather maintain a one-income household. Other things that were referenced as challenges in finding workers was inadequate access to childcare, inaffordable childcare. We know that the childcare industry was also impacted as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Some of those childcare workers, many of which are immigrant-owned, women-owned, many of which can be sometimes family care provider centers, may not have continued their operations as a childcare provider due to the high risk of potentially contracting COVID. They're working in a space where they're working with still a largely unvaccinated community because the vaccine hasn't been readily available. It wasn't approved yet for children between the ages of 5 to 12. And even then, child care providers that are focusing their services for younger children may be at a higher risk of contracting COVID because of those services. And so some have chosen to limit the amount of slots at their childcare centers. And we're hearing that from coast to coast, childcare access is also one of the main challenges for workers returning into the workforce. I think there was also a lot of, during that listening session, we also got a lot of input from business owners around the benefit piece. Some of their workers, upon losing their job at the onset of the pandemic, were benefiting from unemployment insurance benefits, which were expanded, which were extended as well as a result of the ongoing nature of the pandemic. And so some folks thought, well, once those benefits cease to exist, people are going to come back into the workforce in droves, and we have not seen that happen. Another thing that was referenced during that listening session was that some folks are finding it hard to simply just get people to come into the interview. I can tell you, I think it was at least a handful of business owners that said, I carve out days on my calendar specifically for interviewing potential candidates to my business, job candidates, and they don't show up. I don't get a call back. I might have hired somebody that had a great interview, and the first day at the job, they're a no-show. And so this is also something that many employers are referencing is posing a significant challenge to their workforce, to them being able to maintain their businesses and keep their businesses afloat. Some businesses, in order to deal with some of these workforce challenges, and I'll talk a little bit more about some of those themes. And actually, let me just pause really quickly and invite y'all to, at any time, load your questions that you may have, since we are going to be able to take some questions from you all. Would love to see if there are questions that maybe I could respond to. So at any time during the presentation, please feel free to go ahead and load your questions related to this topic, and we'll have a chance to respond to those. One of the things that I wanted to also mention around this workforce issue and some of the gaps that we're seeing, especially in the small business community, we recognize that some of those businesses that have not been able to get to a pre-COVID employment number, having secured enough workers to maintain their pre-COVID operations. Some of the things that we're hearing are folks are having to reduce the number of hours that they're open. This could mean a restaurant going from a 7-day restaurant to a 5-day establishment. We've heard this from barbershops and other service-related industries, that they are having some significant staffing shortages, which is in turn requiring them to limit the number of hours of operation simply because they don't have enough staff on hand to keep their normal hours of operation going. And as you may know, I mean, having had to have closed your business at the onset of the pandemic, deal with closures and reopening depending on what state you were in, having to be in a position right now where you have to limit your business operation hours or reduce the number of days that you're open can really pose a significant harm to the revenues that that business owner needs to generate, even in order to pay back some of the debt that they might have accumulated during the height of the pandemic or as a result of the pandemic. You know, some folks have seen a tremendous benefit from some of the federal relief programs like the Paycheck Protection Program or the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. And while those programs, even on the PPP side, if you were forgiven for a loan, you might have seen a deferred payment, but you still have other payments that folks have, whether it's credit cards, whether it's a different traditional commercial loan product, whether it's a community development financial institution product, something through a CDFI. They have some established debt that they have to repay. We know that some business owners have back commercial rent that has accumulated over a course of sometime over the last 18 months that they also have to repay. And so limiting your business operation hours can absolutely be a huge detriment to the small businesses that are really trying to not just rebuild, not just recover, but essentially recoup a lot of their losses experienced over the last 18 months. Another thing that we've seen small business owners do is be very creative. This is very entrepreneurial, but many folks are referencing creative hiring programs at their places of businesses. We've seen large companies do this very well. Small business owners tend to have more challenges in implementing incentive programs and bonuses simply because they tend to have less resources on hand to do this. But still, we've heard from one business owner that is an HR professional that equips other businesses with benefits packages, and he referenced that he's seen an abundance of small businesses, his small business clients call him and look at redesigning some of their benefit programs, not just looking at healthcare as a benefit, not just looking at retirement programs as a benefit, but looking at how many their overall benefit packages. Are they extending some flexible work from home piece to the job? Are they adding additional flexibility around hours for the employee? And so maybe starting a little bit later in the day and cutting off the day a little shorter, but still looking to get the same amount of work done. So the benefit packages, I think one of the things that he also referenced was life insurance policies being revised that hadn't been a big benefit package or bonus to an overall onboarding package for employees. So reviewing benefits is something that folks are looking at doing, especially coming off of what has been a very challenging year. Another thing that we've heard from business owners that they're doing in order to overcome some of these challenges is instituting some of these short-term hiring bonuses. Sign-on bonuses is a great way to think about it. Some folks are trying to minimize the burden of the employee entering the marketplace by offering a one-time sign-on bonus. I think a couple of the business owners that we spoke with indicated that they have a time frame time-bound hiring incentive. And so the employee, in order to qualify for the incentive, must stay on with that business for at minimum 90 days. I think there are some that have even looked at a 60-day package. And again, a one-time $500 sign-on bonus versus a $2,000 one-time sign-in bonus, depending on how many workers you're looking to staff, can be a pretty significant cost to some employers. Another challenge that we have also heard is around this trying to address some of these childcare gaps that have existed. So we've seen a couple of business owners where they have referenced a partnership program with a local childcare center, reserving a few slots at that childcare center for potential workers that they look to hire. And so they're trying to not just be gender neutral, but encourage women. In that specific program, I think the intent, one of the business owners mentioned their intent was not just being gender neutral in their hiring, but also ensuring that either a father or a woman would be able to reserve that slot and have access to a seat with a child care center. The other thing that we recognize is that the other thing that business owners are struggling with is that some business models have fundamentally shifted, and maybe the intent was to temporarily shift to meet the needs of the changing dynamics of the COVID-19 pandemic, to maintain the health and safety of their workers and customers. But their intent was, once this is all done and it's safe for us to, continue our business operations as normal, we're going to go back to our model. And they're finding that that is within itself quite challenging. We're hearing, we've seen some polls from the worker side that have said, they are not looking to go back into the office. They'd prefer to work in a hybrid model or have more flexible days, more flexible work from home days. And it's interesting because the age, if you look at these surveys and do a cross tab on the age breakdown of some of the respondents, you'll see that some of the older workers are ready to return to normal operations, and some of the younger employees are not necessarily as ready, or they'd be interested in exploring some of those other opportunities to have some of these features or accommodations take on a more permanent approach. And the reality is that not everyone has been able to pivot their business model. We spoke to one business owner. She had a successful waxing business, eyebrow waxing business. And she was unable to really figure out how she was going to be able to transition her business model. She needs to do that in person. One day she was sitting there with her, I think, 11-year-old son. And he said, "Mom, but you have an iPad, so why can't you have your clients send you a photo, you draw up the template for them, and you email that back, and they just, you'll cut your cost or you'll cut your fee," which was a creative way for a young future entrepreneur to be thinking about a solution. And it worked. Her business has actually doubled, and I don't know that she's thinking of reverting back to her old business model. But that's a success case that I don't know works in every other industry, and even in that industry was quite challenging to pull off. And so all to say that, business owners need to continue being extremely creative in how they build solutions. But there are some very real implications on policy that would help address some of these challenges that we've seen heightened as a result of the pandemic. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with folks over the last 18 months around their concern around our childcare investments policy and our policy around paid leave. These are two issues that are currently being discussed at the federal level through the human infrastructure bills that have been presented, these Build Back Better packages that President Biden has put forward. There is no true consensus at this moment of whether this $3.5 trillion package will actually make it through. But what we're hearing is it looks like that package will be significantly cut. In those discussions, what we know is if that price tag is reduced, does this mean that we'll have less investment in childcare access? Does this mean we'll have less opportunity to pass a federal and robust paid leave program, which we currently lack, but in a handful of states where we have state legislation that has been passed and implemented that actually seeks to establish a paid leave program. But we also recognize that, data shows about 56% of women delay returning to the workforce after they have a child until that child is of elementary school age. We're missing a huge population of eligible workers that would return to the workforce should they have access to high quality and affordable childcare. So childcare from a policy lens, let's put aside what people are doing to address their immediate needs around hiring incentives, worker bonuses, readjusting business hours. But from a policy lens, there are some fundamental issues that must be addressed in order for us to have a healthy and robust availability of workers. And especially as we think about equity and ensuring that equity is at its core when we think about rebuilding better or building back better, when we think about that, we must not look at policy as simply having a gender neutral space, but we do need to consider that there are policies that we could be implementing that would enable various members from our workforce to be equipped with what they need, the resources that they need in order to re-enter the workforce and re-enter it permanently, not temporarily, but actually continue their professional trajectory. We know that when someone takes an extended length of period of time off, that could have significant implications for their ability to generate income over their lifetime. A 5-year break post birth for a woman may delay her ability to continue to grow her experience as well as her income. And I should mention, we have seen an uptick of men also take advantage of paid leave in some of the states where we have established paid leave programs. And that's slowly happened over time. But again, at the federal level, on the paid leave issue, we have the Federal Medical Leave Act, FMLA, and that doesn't provide paid leave, it provides protected leave. And for many folks in the US, as we saw with the pandemic, we knew the studies, many reference they were a paycheck away from not being able to make rent. We know that inability to tap into a resource is critical. So paid leave is one of those components that I think we have a unique opportunity to address right now. At the federal level, we hope that we are able to see something happen through the proposed legislation that congressional members are still actively negotiating. The other component of that human infrastructure package is around childcare access, making childcare access more available and more affordable, making investments into I should have also mentioned on the paid leave issue, the care economies, something that is included in paid leave. On the childcare issue, I think that, again, I referenced earlier on, about 56% of working age women, do not immediately re-enter the workforce until their children are of elementary school age. So two huge issues that from a workforce lens, as we think about how these two issues relate to our availability of workers, can actually be addressed at this moment. And whether or not our federal government reaches a consensus, I think that there is something to be said around the state's roles in understanding their workforce trends and seeing how statewide policy can also support closing up the gap there. I see a question here. As we've learned, okay, well, I can take this question. As we've learned during the pandemic, access to fast broadband service is critical for everyone. How likely is it there will be a federal support to improve broadband access everywhere? So the broadband piece, great question, Daryl. The broadband piece is something that was included not in the human infrastructure package, which is the one that comes with the heavier price tag, $3.5 trillion. That's still being debated on, and we do think that that price tag will be dropped in order to meet some of the moderate Democrats' demands on bringing down that price tag. Although, it sounds like progressives in Congress, not sure where they will. I don't think that will go so well with some of the progressive caucus. The other bill, the one that you're referencing, is the bipartisan infrastructure plan. So the bipartisan infrastructure plan, that one was more focused on what you would call traditional infrastructure or hard infrastructure, including our roads and bridges and the broadband piece. That package did have support from both the House, and it sounds like the Senate will be able to vote on it. Again, this is what we would consider traditional infrastructure, roads, bridges, and broadband was included there too. So that seems to have significant support across the political aisle or across the political spectrum to pass. We know that our roads and bridges have been deteriorating for some time. This poses a significant risk to businesses. A lot of businesses also referenced not having access to reliable broadband access as a key reason why they may not have been able to secure federal relief through the SBA programs. If we recall, and I think I've done some reflection work, and I like to now tell folks, like, I think part of that period of last year, my mind has blocked it because we have, it was traumatic in so many different ways. I would never say that I'm a frontline worker or try to say something like that, but small businesses were hurting. They were calling us evening, weekends. I mean, you think the kinds of stories we were hearing from business owners on the other line of the phone, other end of the phone, just, crying and really breaking down because they were about to lose generational wealth that they've been able to accumulate through this business that is going to be closed and is at the brink of permanent closure. I mean, these were very challenging times. So, but as we were doing that, and we know that one of the key components of folks having access to those federal relief programs was their ability to have access to the information in a timely fashion. The first round of PPP was launched on April 13th or April 14th. The pandemic was declared a global crisis March, I believe it was March 13th, or might have been 2 days before that. Within a month's worth of time span, we saw the first federal relief, the first stimulus package passed. We saw bulk of that designated to small business support through this creation of a whole new product, the Paycheck Protection Program. And a key component of having access to that program would have been having timely information at your hands. And even then, it wasn't certain that you would have access to that first batch of funding. We saw a lot of folks with banking relationships that were not able to get that kind of funding. But even if you were looking for the access to information and you lacked the broadband access, a lot of our technical assistance services and providers by that point were transitioned into only doing virtual programming. We were doing webinars, the consulting that you might have done in person was all transitioned into a virtual environment. We've heard from business owners that said, I drove down to my local, Starbucks and McDonald's to try to get free Wi-Fi on my smartphone. to complete my application for PPP or for the economic injury disaster loan. We saw parents that leveraged free Wi-Fi access networks in order to have their children attend school virtually. So broadband as a whole is a significant barrier and issue, and we must address it, especially from an equity standpoint. Again, we know that there's a digital divide and a digital gap in the skills that folks may have around digital access, but we also recognize that it's not just on the skills piece. It's the actual infrastructure. If you don't have access to high-speed broadband and you're being asked to pivot your business model to, get with the times and have a website and be online, and you literally don't have the infrastructure in your backyard to do that, it becomes a very challenging place for many business owners. And we've heard this loud and clear from some of the listening sessions that team members in Georgia and in Colorado have been doing with rural small business owners, where they have shared with us some of these challenges around broadband access. I think there's pressure from a community standpoint around the inequity access points to broadband. And again, because it falls under this more traditional infrastructure package, I think there is there's a high likelihood that that component of the human infrastructure packages that are being discussed right now will be included. We've been a strong advocate for increasing broadband access. We know that it is important. We know that there are many households that rely on one device households that leverage their mobile smartphone as their primary Wi-Fi connected tool. As someone who has been able to do my work virtually, I can't tell you that I myself have experienced those gaps, but I have spoken with many business owners and know of many business owners that have experienced those gaps that have been extremely challenging. And so I'm very excited to see that you are asking about this piece around broadband access. I think it's going to be critical for a rapid and speedy recovery. We're going to need to have reliable broadband access so that our community, our small business community, and our community at large could be able to get reliable access. Sorry, I'm going to turn off notifications because I'm seeing they are continuing to come in.
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
Great. If anyone else has additional questions, please, again, we have a few more minutes here in the session, and I'm coming up to a close on my remarks, but I would love to continue to answer any additional questions on some of the federal proposals that are currently out there. Folks have questions about those, or around this larger theme around closing the people gap, workforce related issues. I'm gonna continue talking a little bit about one of the things that we saw at the onset, actually pre-pandemic. We had seen a couple of states motion to set up future of work commissions. These future of work commissions in several states were tasked with developing a plan for those states to modernize their workforce development programs and systems. This is something that I think is also important to do from a policy lens. I'm going to just speak very broadly here, not name drop any states, but some states very much struggled to get their employment development departments together. Not having the data modernization tools and components in place also posed a huge challenge for workers to be able to access resources that they needed on a timely fashion. And we could see some of those issues result in displacement of some of those workers. So example, EDD programs are programs, many of which were, or EDD departments were the ones that were distributing unemployment insurance, and in many cases that was the department that was tasked with this piece. And we saw some folks that were still, or some states that were still leveraging technology that was built back in the 70s, back in the 80s, that had to bring back senior tech professionals, seasoned tech professionals to work on modernizing some of those systems. I don't even know if we can say modernizing some of the systems, but trying to at least solve for some of the capacity gaps of the established systems. And so I know that moving forward, looking ahead, there's a lot of work to do to ensure that those tools, those departments have the adequate tech in order to meet the needs of their workers in cases of, in cases where claims are being submitted at high numbers. We hope to never be in a position where we're seeing a global crisis again impact our workforce in such a way that it has over the last 18 months. But again, I think if we look back at some of the research that is currently being developed around the Great Resignation, we will see that there are a multitude of different reasons referenced by workers as far as looking to work in sustainable work environments, looking to ensure that they have adequate pay for adequate work, looking for equity, trying to solve for those benefits that they're looking for, and things like that. I am looking at the questions, and I don't see any additional questions that have come in. I don't see any additional questions that have come in, and I still have about 10 minutes or so. So if folks have any questions that they'd also like to ask, right now would be the perfect time to go ahead and ask those questions in the Q&A, the Q&A box, or in the chat box. While folks are, loading some additional questions in, I'm just going to share a couple more findings from this listening session that we hosted a month or so ago. One of the things that we asked business owners was around ways in which they adapted their business models. Many small business owners had to adapt their business in some way because of the worker shortages and the new regulations established through various health departments, typically at the state level, around operating safely because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Some business owners indicated that they did not have enough staff to be able to do job schedules. I believe in this case, this was a cleaning staffing small business. He owns a staffing agency that operates and does cleaning for residential and commercial spaces. And he mentioned that due to not having enough staff, he didn't have to minimize his business operation hours. As the business owner, his workload has increased because he's now filling in some of the gaps himself. But one of the things that they've seen or have reverted to is canceling some of those scheduled jobs that he otherwise would have been able to fulfill had he had enough staff to do that. Another business owner discussed the importance of the onboarding process and public relations to display what work is needed and expectations you have for applicants. This was a consultant that mentioned that what they've done is they haven't really revisited their benefit package. They felt that they had a very robust set of offerings already and a robust set of benefits already. But what they looked to do was share some testimonials from current staff They also established an incentive program for referrals from established staff members. So if a staff member was able to connect to their peer group or their network and bring on an additional team member, there was an incentive to that initial referral employee. And a few business owners mentioned that they've been able to also mirror this program and have found it to be successful. One of the other, when we asked about what are your thoughts about what could be causing this, I mean, there was a wide range of responses as well. Many talked about unemployment being a factor. Some indicated that simply they've gotten a sense that some of their staff have made those kind of lifestyle changes and choices, have done some reflection and are looking at prioritizing other things over work or over pay. Some business owners indicated a continued fear around the sense of uncertainty that we still have. We've seen a rise we saw a tremendous spike in COVID cases. We saw a spike in cases with the Delta variant, and there was a sense that some business owners felt employees, if they are at higher risk of contracting COVID or at higher risk of potentially bringing that COVID exposure to somebody else in their household, somebody that maybe has a caregiving role, their worker, and then they go and caregive for their elderly parent in their home. That kind of worker is going to want to minimize and reduce the risk of getting exposed to COVID-19. And if they're in a service-related industry, working with children, we saw this at an ice skating rink, I believe, where the business owner said, there are a lot of my employees that simply are afraid to return because we're working with demographic of people or an audience of people that doesn't have the vaccine currently. So that's something that I think we're going to continue to see be a reference point in some industries, especially those industries that are interfacing with customers at a high level. In the food and beverage industry, we've seen some requirements. Again, typically, these are all vary based on the state that you're in. We've seen some states and cities require vaccine requirements for indoor seating at food and beverage establishments. We've seen that shift. Some of those are now being expanded to other venues, not just related to food and beverage, but other industries like beauty and wellness, or the beauty industry as a whole, barbershops, salons, etc. So I found it to be interesting that the business owners reference not vaccines necessarily, but COVID-19 and the rising cases to be a direct result for their employees not wanting to be exposed. And this also was something that led into a discussion around vaccinations. There were a few business owners that said, we encourage our staff to be vaccinated. It's not a requirement, however, because we don't want to limit the employee pool. There was, in two cases that I can think of, two business owners that said, we think that about 100% of our staff is vaccinated, but we don't even want to ask or make it a requirement yet in our HR manual because we need 100% of our workforce at this moment. As we mentioned at the top of the hour, women in the workforce was something that was referenced a lot in the listening session. There's a lot of we've also included some questions in recent polling around how women in the workforce have been impacted, how we aren't seeing, again, even though those benefits have ended on unemployment insurance, we haven't seen a significant return into the workforce of eligible workers. So again, a lot of concerns around children returning to school. If the child gets exposed, the mother's at home with the child, typically that becomes the primary caretaker. And so, all of these issues really speak to the need of a changing and dynamic workplace. As employers, we're asking small business owners to continue to be very creative in how they find solutions for their workforce and staffing needs. At the federal level, we recognize there are policy improvements to be made around establishing accessible, affordable, reliable broadband access, around ensuring that we have affordable and accessible healthcare coverage, paid leave access, childcare access. All of these issues really relate to equipping us with that foundation that we need in order to have a healthy supply of workers enter our workforce. For the first time since collecting labor statistics, we have seen this decline in and this huge shortage in our labor workforce. And I think another thing that's been thrown are ideas around addressing our immigration system. I don't know that, we're having such a hard time with our infrastructure packages right now that I don't know that we're ready to even begin discussing how to address the needs of fixing our immigration system. But what we recognize is, yes, we have some gaps that we're seeing from industry to industry. We are seeing these workforce shortages from coast to coast. So it's impacting us on the West Coast, it's impacting folks on the East Coast, and of course in Middle America as well. And we at Small Business Majority will continue to do research on this. We're looking to do some educational workshops to ensure that business owners know about the benefits of working with a workforce development center to be able to potentially find job seekers. Workforce development centers are something that we've funded for many of years through our tax-paying dollars. And workforce development centers can also provide incentives and stipends for on-the-job training and onboarding new employees. And so we've been working with several economic development agencies and cities to do some educational workshops on this topic around ensuring that our small business community understands the plethora of resources that exist in the workforce space. We've also seen some programs where other nonprofits are stepping in to do some reskilling or upskilling of workers to diversify the skills that they have in order to enter a new field. That's been something that has also been a growing trend. And then I'll close with saying some of the workers that we've spoken with exited the workforce to start a small business themselves. And by start a small business, typically this is a low asset industry, something that doesn't require a significant amount of wealth or a significant amount of assets, consulting, service-based. We've seen a lot of folks enter the gig economy. That's going to continue to shape how our workforce is shifting. And all to say, for some of these states that had set up future of work commissions, I think a lot of the recommendations that they were looking at were, 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, once automation, is ramped up, what kind of low wage work will we see exit? One thing that I will say there is, if anything, the pandemic has accelerated the speed at which we need to address these gaps and build solutions. There's a sense of urgency to do this. It has also accelerated the rate at which we're going to see some of this automation come into effect, some of this hybrid future of work environment shift. And I think that there will be some permanent changes that are made in some businesses and industries as a result of a multitude of these items. Well, I think that brings me to a close, unless I have anything that I have failed to address. I wanted to, I'll invite you to visit our website. That's www.smallbusinessmajority.org. We have there you'll be able to find our policy agendas, you'll be able to find our event calendar, and you'll also be able to find my contact information should you have any questions on anything I covered today.